Good morning and welcome to the weekly review here on Teachers Talk Radio. Joining me to review the week, we have Nathan Ginn, we have Lucy Newberger, and we have Tom Rogers. We were going to be joined by Jeff Pedley this morning. Unfortunately, he can't join us. He's not feeling very well. So hopefully he'll join us in a future week. In the week in education, more than half of schools in England were either partially closed or closed due to teacher strikes on Wednesday. In addition, some students might be going on strike. We're going to be hearing about the student strike movement based in Derbyshire, about students not getting the support that they feel they need with attendance and persistent absence. And also, a whistleblower in Glasgow has revealed that failings in behaviour policy have caused turmoil in a Glasgow school. I can barely get the words out of my mouth this morning. But let's start, first of all, I suppose, with the biggest story of the week, which is that over 100,000 teachers joined a walkout organised by the NEU on Wednesday, which led to the closure of more than half of schools in England. Either partially closed or fully closed. We know that former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn was joining a march through Westminster, and around 500,000 workers from all professions were on strike. First question then is this going to achieve anything? Let's start with cold calling. Nathan.
This one on its own, no. I don't think, one strike I don't think is enough to change anything. And it's not all of the profession. And I know a lot of schools are shut. The worry for me is the unions, we've now shown our hand, right? And there were schools trying to stay open. Now all schools know who is going to strike in their school, right? Which means when we come to the next one, wherever it may be, because it's different in different parts of the country, schools can prepare now. And that kind of undermines the strike. And schools will be putting their plans in place saying, right, these people didn't turn up. We have an idea that they're not going to be here on these next dates. And it means that disruption that you need for a strike to be effective just isn't going to be as big the next time round. And so my worry is, we're going to get entrenched. We're going to need all of these days, and it's going to need to get bigger. The one thing I will say is I was out on strike, and there was a lot of support from other unions, from other people there. And I think that collective movement across professions might change something. I don't think teachers on its own at the moment, as we stand with just the NEU, is going to change a lot.
It does feel that the public are more behind this set of strikes than they have been in the past. But is there a fear, Lucy, that if teachers continue to strike and there's 6 more days of strike action planned, that actually the public are going to lose faith and support for teachers is going to dwindle with the more strike action that is? Or do you see it being quite constant and consistent?
The support, no. It's always a very delicate balancing act. We as teachers know that education is a continual political football, and I feel that the profession's only just recovered from how we were received during COVID and all of that. So I completely understand what Nathan's saying in that we need the disruption to be effective, but at the same time, timing's going to be everything, and the way we manage this going forward is going to be everything, because in order to keep that public support, we're going to have to be very careful, because yes, I do feel that they were behind teachers on this occasion. Going forward, I don't know, because of the amount of schooling that children have missed in recent years, because of everything else that's gone on in education. I feel the next maneuvers are going to have to be very well thought out, and I don't even know what that looks like. I'd have to go away and think about that a little bit more. But I worry that the support will dwindle if we don't take our next steps very, very carefully.
I was talking to one union rep the other day who was telling their members in their school that actually, if you were uncertain about whether or not to go on strike this Wednesday, don't, and actually go in and work a normal day, and then the next strike you can, if you want to go on strike, then do that, because it would be more inconvenient and it might surprise a few people as well. The NEU said that Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, is on notice to change her stance. There had been negotiations on Monday, which weren't really negotiations by the sounds of things. Fun fact from the strike day is that use of Oak National Academy was double that of the Omicron peak as well during COVID as well. So clearly students knew what they were doing. Obviously, we've got more strike days coming, and the NEU said that 300,000 teachers were on strike. the government's spin is that 90.7% schools remained open to some or all pupils. Did we get Nathan, did you get the email from Gillian Keegan on Tuesday?
No.
No, you wouldn't have, because education is devolved.
I'm
so
Welsh. Yeah. No, yeah. So I didn't. I am still signed up to the FE emails because it is interesting, kind of like the stuff that moves across. But no, being Welsh, we don't have to deal with that as such. So we get slightly different negotiating, but not on national stuff.
It's fascinating because we got, as a school teacher in England, I got an email from Gillian Keegan from the government basically saying, we want to do what we can to keep schools open. We've given you this pay rise already, which has been funded, which I think needed a bit of a fact check, that one. But yeah, who's to blame for this? Is it the government? Is it school leadership? I mean, who's to blame for this? The easy answer would be the government, right? But is it more complicated than that, or is it just as simple as that? Lucy, what do you think?
Oh, that's a loaded question, isn't it? Oof. I think it's a whole combination of things over the last few years. I mean, I think the last strikes were 2016. This has been exacerbated, obviously, and I know I'm going there again. This has been exacerbated by COVID, but it's all of it. It's everything. It's everything that's gone on. It's the exam debacles over the last few years. It's all built up into what we're dealing with now. And I think to blame one single entity, as much as we want to push this on the government, that's a huge part of it. But there's also lots of other things going on as well, which we don't have enough time to delve into now. But it's a mishmash of a lot of complicated things that have gone on in the last few years.
Mm-hmm. And finally, one word from you, Tom, because I know that you were there in the Manchester strikes, reporting on behalf of Teachers Talk Radio. What was the general mood? Was it one of organised dissent? Was it one of hope? Was it one of chaos? What did you make of it?
Well, there was a lot of people there. We're talking probably thousands there. But like I say, I mean, it was obviously the turnout for the strike was very good from within NEU, but it was just an NEU strike. So, in some senses, we already discussed this before, is that the other unions didn't meet the threshold, and maybe that negated the impact of it a little. I mean, the vibe was that, I guess, that it was people were up for it. People were up for it. But
we look for. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether or not that lasts, really, I suppose. If you want a fantastic show coming up in just under an hour at 11 a.m., hosted by Yasmin Omar, who's going to say, is it worth teachers joining a union? She's got two guests from two sides of a divide. The Teachers Talk Radio, we like to present all views and not just one. And so do join us on Twitter Spaces at 11 a.m. for more talk about the teachers' strikes and the benefits and drawbacks of being part of a union. But for now, on to our next story. Good to get the graphic working. Now, our next story is about children potentially going on strike in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. A not-for-profit special needs organisation which supports children with special educational needs and abilities and their families is leading a national campaign for youngsters to go on strike from their educational provision. The rationale here is that, yes, teachers should have their support, right, but children need to have their voices too. A spokesperson said that we are fully in support of the NEU's decision to strike to improve working conditions and funding for teachers. If teachers are content and have their needs met, then there's a better chance our children's needs will be met too. It's also time our children had their voices heard. They want to learn too. And this is all about the idea of school refusal or persistent absence, and how the education system for children with SEND is underfunded, and the idea that they want to abolish the archaic punitive punishments of fines and prosecutions for school attendance that drops below 95%. Nathan, do you have any sympathy?
For young people striking, yeah, I do. I think, we have to be careful what we're talking about. There have been strikes before. As I say, like one of the schools I taught in 1911 was one of the first to start a wave of strikes in Llanelli. But it was for a reason. I think we have to differentiate between like children protesting, which again is a valid thing, and actual strikes where you want an achievable thing. And I think particularly for SEND students, I was reading an article about a school in Suffolk recently where they're having to cut half of their teaching assistants. Now, we might say that will affect everyone, but it will disproportionately impact on children with SEND because a lot of the support is around that. And so when we talk about funding and pay rises, and particularly support staff and treating them with the respect and the pay that they deserve, that is a specific issue that will affect children's education. And I think it's right that young people are recognizing that, and they do have a voice, and they should have a voice. And so they are able to do things. I think it's hard, when we talk about raising it within school and supporting it within school. That's a tricky issue because I think some people could fall foul of some bits of legislation around that and promoting ideological beliefs. But yeah, if there is an issue, you have a right to protest. You have a right to withdraw from something in protest. And I think that's an effective method. And I think then in the narrative of more general strikes, I think that would be helpful because I think, that is the narrative at the moment. We're not talking about protests. Lots of workplaces are talking about strikes. And so joining in with that movement, I think is an effective measure. And yeah, there's a big issue with pay, particularly of support staff, and with budgets, and that will affect support staff because they will be the first to go, and that will affect SEND pupils. So yeah,
So
if
teachers go on strike, they lose a day's pay.
Yeah.
If children go on strike, should their parents be fined?
I think, if that is part of the policy, but one of the things that a lot of young people, and it sounds like in this article as well, people will be complaining about is the fines, and are those fines effective and do they work? And, I think you could go on strike and not be fined. It would depend on the rest of your attendance. And I think if you could argue it, there's probably a chance that you'd be able to argue it.
But at the same time, Nathan, teachers are striking over pay and they go on strike and they lose pay. And so if these people are striking, if these children are striking over attendance and absence fines, surely the policy should still be followed unless the policy ends up changing.
Yeah, so you could change the policy, or they could push it all the way through, and I would support that. I'd be really interested in a year or two's time when people start pushing the boundaries of some of these fines and seeing how where reasonable adjustments sit in, particularly around SEND and absence, and whether schools are willing to, and local authorities, whether they're willing to be taken to task and taken to court about these fines. And I think then we will know for sure. At the moment, I don't think the risk of anyone doing anything about it is particularly high.
Lucy, you're in the international sector in Portugal. Do you think there's any chance that anything like this might happen in Portugal?
Difficult to say. I don't know. I mean, again, it's an ongoing SEND provision, and all of the things associated with that is an ongoing issue. It's also something in international schools that's a very sort of strange and grey area as well, because as much as these schools are sort of displaying how fantastic and marvelous they are, I would argue that their SEND side of things is not. So it's not something that's being invested in from where I can see. It's not something that's being well supported. So much like Nathan, I'm very intrigued to see kind of over the next few years where this goes, and particularly in the sort of very interesting times we're in now, with teachers going on strike, with money being the issue that it is, where we're going to end up, because none of this is going away. And I think that's what I feel from the government side in the UK. They sort of think, if we just kind of, but no, it's not. It's only going to get louder.
Interesting. And the date for your diary, when these children's strikes are penciled in for, is the 29th of September. So I'm sure that in our weekly review, end of September, early October, I'm sure we'll be able to talk about that then. Before we move on to our final story of the morning, this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides, and magazines, specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. On to our final story of the morning. Let's go. This relates to a interview I did actually a few months ago with Anne Longfield, previously the Children's Commissioner, where I brought this up with her about her commission on young lives recommendations around exclusions. It's an exclusive story from the Herald, and it says that the prevalence of bullying and indiscipline in Scotland's schools is the result of a culture of toxic positivity that fails pupils. This is according to a whistleblowing teacher from a school where staff are afraid to go to work. One teacher who works in a school in Glasgow's East End, where staff actually went on strike, running theme this morning, due to fears over pupil behaviour, actually spoke to the newspaper and claimed that physical and verbal violence is being normalised in Scotland's schools, and pupils who witness this violence or miss class time because of it are being failed. The issues were first raised to the then Education Minister of Scotland, John Swinney, in 2018, and the letter writer, who remained anonymous, caused controversy by describing the pupils as animals, speaking of gangs of young people roaming hallways and carrying out targeted assaults on other pupils. So the question is, I suppose, what do we do with a school like this? And I'm going to start with, I can see that you're all thinking very hard here. I'm going to start with Lucy, then go to Tom, and then Nathan, I think. So I'm going to start with Lucy, no pressure.
I mean, it's very, well, sorry, my voice is going already. In my mind, it's difficult because we want to keep children in school. We want to keep we need them to be there. But if you've got a situation where teachers are afraid to go to work because pupil behavior is not being managed appropriately, you cannot have that. So I don't really know what the solution is here. I don't really know where you go, because clearly this whole kind of toxic positivity approach and this whole restorative approach that the school's been taking is not working. That is abundantly clear. So I don't know where you go. Do you exclude these pupils? And do you say, right, you're done, you can't come back, they're missing out on their education, all the rest of it? Or is there another way? I don't know, but my instant thought is the protection of teachers, and I don't think they should have to be going through that. So they need support from higher up to understand where they can go next and how they can find an alternative approach to the approach that quite clearly is having absolutely no impact whatsoever.
Certainly the teachers agree with you, because 32 teachers are in the school, all members of the NASUWT, in December took part in 12 days of strike action. Now, this situation, Tom, is complicated by the fact that in Glasgow there is a citywide policy of no exclusions. Is that going to be a key role in this, or are there other factors at play? And what's your take on it generally?
I mean, ultimately, my sort of views are probably more on the traditional side when it comes to behaviour or sort of how schools operate culturally. And, that probably runs parallel to a lot of the sort of policies and cultures that have been pushed in a lot of these schools where this is happening. So for me, it comes down to a cultural change. It comes down to the teachers being able to have enough respect and enough authority to be able to actually do their jobs. I think I've heard this sort of phrase of like student empowerment a lot, which I do. I understand what that means. I understand about giving students a voice and so on and so forth, but there has to be respect with that. If there isn't respect with it, then actually you've got to change the policy back to something more fundamental. You've got to go back to the fundamentals, which are the teacher needs to be able to teach be safe in a classroom, go through a curriculum. If you can't do those things, there's no point in having a school. So it's all well and good saying, right, let's put the responsibility on the teacher. Let's put the responsibility on their teaching, on their behavior. Because if their behavior can change, then all the students' behavior will change. Or if their teaching can change, then all the students' behavior will change, whatever, right? The responsibility and accountability needs to be shifted more towards the parents, the students, and back onto wider society, in all fairness, and away from not all of it, but some of it.
So is it a societal problem, or is it a sort of problem at sort of governance level in terms
well,
of...
to be fair, you can look at schools, you can look at some schools who do manage to maintain good standards of behavior, very good standards of behavior in some cases, that have different cohorts. So yeah, I mean, society is going that way, but that doesn't mean that schools can't actually stop this. And violence against, I mean, this idea of tolerating abuse, violence, assaults, all these other different things, that go on, maybe abuse or abusive, even abusive comments or abusive behavior, I don't think there should be tolerance for that. I don't think there should be tolerance for that in schools. I know there's going to be different opinions on that and different approaches to it. And some will excuse the students for that and say, this is about other issues. This is why they've done it. This is, there's all these reasons why. I get that. But ultimately, if you strip away all consequences, actual proper consequences for behaviors, then you end up with a bit of a free-for-all. Or if you try and just gloss it over with, like you just said, toxic positivity all the time, then that's teaching students that all their behavior will be excused.
It's worth noting as well that teachers in the school are not expected to use the word consequences when they are talking to children. Now, Jay has commented. Good morning, Jay. Welcome. He's listening on YouTube. He says, maybe external support from an outside agency to give the school support. I find sometimes schools are more willing to listen to outside agencies rather than the staff dealing with the children each day. Nathan, you're nodding your head. Are you in agreement? Does this tally with your experience? You're on mute,
mate. Oh, you're back.
Sorry. I think sometimes it is hard to see it when you're in it. And I think that cycle of kind of things slipping is hard to see. So someone coming in externally can help. I do agree with that. I agree with what a lot of that Tom said there as well. I'm probably at the other end of the spectrum. I work with challenging behavior, and I believe that behavior is communication. The thing that worries me about this, though, is that we are ignoring the behavior. So even if you believe that the child is communicating something through whatever the behavior is, you still don't get to ignore it. You still have to do something about it. And that's the bit that worries me about this kind of toxic positivity, that people are glossing over things. Now, if a kid swears, you might have different approaches to that. Or if a kid is violent, you might have different approaches to that. But you need to have an approach. Even if you believe that it is communicating some kind of trauma, or if you believe that it is, in some way not their responsibility for the behavior, you still have to record it. You still have to do something about it. You still have to have a plan to support your staff in dealing with it and experiencing it. And that's the bit that worries me, is whatever end of the spectrum you're on, ignoring a behavior is not acceptable.
If you'd like more guidance about this issue, and we've got a couple of shows coming up which might take your fancy with our sponsors, John Catt. We've got a show hosted by Nathan, actually. Is it Jamie Tom?
Yeah,
called Talking to Teenagers, coming up very soon. And we've also got a show hosted by John Gibbs with Lekka Sharma called Building Culture. And those two shows, with our sponsors, John Catt, I think will be really good at sort of pinning down some of the issues involved with this. Now, it is 10:25. We've got just under 5 minutes left. Before we go, I just wanted to go around and talk about our favourite Teachers Talk radio show from the past week. And I'm going to start with Nathan. Then I'm going to go to Lucy. Then I'm going to go to Tom Rogers, and then we'll finish with me. So Nathan, without further ado.
Okay, my favorite show of the week was Tom, like up there, right? And it was his. He was talking to head teachers, and like I don't want this to sound bad. I thought initially that I might not enjoy it because it was talking to head teachers, and I'm not a head teacher. But there was this humanizing element about kind of hearing the experiences, and I don't often think about that, about what my head teacher is going through, and the challenges they face. And what that's like being at the top of the organization. So I really enjoyed that. Kind of, it gave me a different view, a different perspective, a humanizing one for people who sometimes, particularly this week, we've been talking about as our bosses and taking union action potentially against. So I really enjoyed that one.
Thank you for that, Nathan. Lucy, I know you had a few, but which one did you go for in the end?
So my favorite was Natalie's this week, which was talking about children who are gifted and talented, but also the mental health implications that go with that. How you, as a teacher, can acknowledge these children in class and make sure that their behavior doesn't slip when they get frustrated or bored, and the strategies you can put in place for that, but also acknowledging that, neurodiversity fits into that as well. It's a really, really good listen, and I encourage you to go forth and find it. It is on as a podcast on Spotify.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lucy. Tom Rogers, your favourite show of the week? We'd love to be able to hear you on this, but I'm afraid you are on mute.
I like Lucy's, the guided reading one. That was very good. I enjoyed it a lot. I've learned a lot. And,
which was nice as well, that popped up.
Yeah. And yeah, I recommend people to listen to it if you're interested in guided reading as a strategy, as a sort of hot topic. Then it's definitely worth looking up and having a listen to that. Again, it's on Spotify, it's on the website.
Yes, and it was on Twitter Spaces as well, and the recording's still on Twitter, should you want to listen to it on Twitter. I don't want to carry on scratching each other's backs. I'm going to go for Eugene McFadden. Yesterday on the Twilight Show, I thought it was a really, really good listen. I was captivated to it for a full hour and a half, talking about EHCPs. As a classroom teacher, obviously we're all teachers of SEND, but I felt as if I learned loads from that about the EHCP process and how these children are or aren't supported in some cases. And also learning about the assess, plan, do, review cycle, and how it's not, a massive spreadsheet or something. It's just a chronology of what you're doing with that kid. And I found it really enlightening and really accessible. So Eugene for me. So that brings the weekly review to a close. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and talking it out. Thank you to Nathan, Lucy, and Tom. We will see you next week for next week's weekly review. But in the meantime, Yasmin's on at 11 a.m. on Twitter Spaces. Make sure you listen to her. Lucy, Nathan are repping the brand, as I shall as well. Tom seems to be the odd one out, but I've got another 70 of them in my cupboard. Why not call into a Teachers Talk radio show and you might be able to win one? So with 28 minutes gone, thank you very much for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and take care. See you later.